What is going on, everybody? So I am back today to do a video similarly to a video I did a couple of weeks ago where I talked all things The Shining. I finally read Stephen King's The Shining after a very long time of wanting to read it and always being a fan of the Stanley Kubrick film, and I thought that it would be really interesting to compare and contrast those two. And I always find it interesting to watch films that are based on books and to see kind of how they align and how things match up. And so when I was really young, I watched Brian De Palma's Carrie the first time. I was probably like 13 or 14 years old when I watched that movie for the very first time, and it has been years since I've seen it. Well, recently I decided to read Stephen King's Carrie because I'd never read it before and I wanted to read it, and I thought it would be interesting to rewatch De Palma's Carrie and kind of compare and contrast those, and I'll talk a little bit about the remakes, but mostly I want to focus on the comparison between Stephen King's Carrie and Brian De Palma's Carrie. So let's get into it right now. Carrie, the film, is directed by Brian De Palma. Carrie White, a shy and troubled teenage girl who is tormented by her high school peers and her fanatically religious mother, begins to use her powers of telekinesis to exact revenge upon them. So it's really interesting. When I watched this when I was younger, I just very much remember the scene at the prom at the end of the film and just how impactful that scene was at such a young age, and it horrified me. And why it horrified me at that time was just seeing these kids get thrown around and murdered. And as far as the subject matter that the film was trying to convey, I was a little young, so I really didn't think about it all that much. And the thing about my life now is the idea of Carrie and what it represents resonates so much deeper with me as an adult because of the life I've lived. I've said on this channel multiple times, I grew up in a conservative Christian household. My father was a minister, so having religious beliefs forced down my throat my entire life as a young child is something that I can relate heavily to. I was not locked in a closet and forced to, recite prayers until my parent thought that I should be able to come out. Nothing to that extreme level, but as far as like the extremist beliefs and like being a minister's kid and not being able to always engage in the things I wanted to do and participate in the things I wanted because of how it would make my dad look and those types of things, I can really relate heavily to that type of a source material. So I was very excited because I'd already seen De Palma's film, but I'd never read Stephen King's book. So I was really interested to read the book first and then revisit De Palma's Carrie. And what I will say, this is one of the very rare circumstances where I like Brian De Palma's film more than I like Stephen King's book. And there's reasons for that. And like I said with The Shining, obviously one can't exist without the other. I'm very glad that Stephen King's book exists so that De Palma could create this film. But the problem that I have with Stephen King's book is you're taking this subject matter about this young teenage girl who, by all accounts, is a very sweet, loving, kind individual who lives at home with a brainwashed, psychopath, conservative Christian mother who literally views her daughter as nothing more than a vehicle to force her religious beliefs onto. And as we learn later on in the book and the film, resents her daughter because of how she was born. And so at the beginning of the film and the book, we have the scene in the locker room where Carrie is belittled by these girls. She starts her period. She doesn't know what her period is because her mother didn't educate her on any of that. So the girls throw tampons at her, say horrible things. And it's really a hard watch because bullying in our society now is already just to a peak, and it just gets worse and worse for kids, especially when you look at kids in the LGBTQ community and what they're going through right now. It's just getting worse and worse and worse. And so you have this young girl who's a part of this religious lifestyle that she doesn't want to be a part of, that she's forced to be a part of, and she can't help it that her mother didn't educate her. And the girls in this are so cruel and awful towards her. And both the book and the film do a really great job early on establishing that. The thing I like about the film more than the book is we stick with Carrie's character more, to where we can build that empathy that we have towards her because of all the horrible things that she's going through, and we kind of see her lightness and what makes her so lovable. Stephen King's book, the issue that I have with it is you're jumping from news articles post the prom and everything that happened. You're reading psychology articles, interviews with kids that were at the school that survived, and you're kind of jumping perspectives all over the place to where holding that empathy that you have towards Carrie's character is harder because we're not with her as much. And I feel like even the blow up at the prom isn't as much as what's in De Palma's movie. And I feel like having that, seeing how De Palma approaches that source material is really great, and I appreciate it a lot. It's almost like he knew what from the book would work and what wouldn't translate to film, and that's all really great. The one thing about De Palma's movie, that opening sequence is really creepy. I'm not sure why he felt like he needed to shoot slow-mo sequences of a bunch of topless girls at a high school. It was the 70s and it was a horror film, but like it's still kind of seedy and gross, and I watch it every time and I'm like, why is this even in the movie? But aside from that, I do think it's a really incredible character study, and there's some really unique visual effects in this. De Palma is obsessed with split diopter shots, and throughout the film you get, and for those of you out there who aren't familiar with the camera terminology, a split diopter is a thing you can use with a camera lens that you can focus on something in the foreground and the background. So normally with a camera you can only really focus on one element. So like if my hand is here and someone's in the background, it's hard for the camera to retain and focus on both. But if you use a split diopter, you can focus on both at the exact same time, and there's several shots throughout the film that he's obsessed with using split diopter. He does a couple split screen moments, which he's really known for in his career, most famously the film Sisters, which is phenomenal. But I really like that build up, and I think the tension in this film, and even Carrie, is something that most people have known about even if they've never seen it. And so the whole time you know where it's going to blow up to, and seeing like the guy who that ends up taking Carrie to the prom, and how you can see his perspective even shift, and he's genuinely nice to her and sees the lightness in her and how wonderful of a person that she is. And even his girlfriend, she feels guilty for what she's done, and she wants Carrie to like be able to enjoy herself. And you know, you have that kind of push and pull of the really evil kids that treat her terribly, and then the ones who kind of feel bad for the actions that they've committed. And I think that's all really fascinating, and it blows up into an insane third act conclusion that I think is handled so well. The sequence with the house falling apart to me is kind of just out of left field, but I like it compared to the book, where like everything happens and you get this huge aftermath of like all of these like news articles that you're getting again talking about people directly affected by everything that occurred, and that's all really interesting. But the problem is, like I said, is you're jumping so many different places that the power and the impact that this material is supposed to have on you about empathizing with a person who is put in a horrible situation and is bullied essentially just because they exist, that doesn't pull with me as much as the Brian De Palma film. And I do think there are elements of Carrie, the book from Stephen King, that are definitely worth reading, and it's very interesting to see. I actually listened to the audiobook, and what was really cool when I listened to the audiobook is Sissy Spacek actually narrated it, which was really neat. And there was a really cool introduction from Stephen King about where he came up with the idea for this story, and that there was some young girls that he went to school with that he saw get bullied really horribly, and one of them ended up committing suicide, and how it really just stuck with him for a long time because the girl who killed herself was so like light and nice and caring towards others, and she was made fun of because her parents were poor and couldn't afford clothes for her, and so she wore the same outfit all the time. And it's really heartbreaking to know that that stuff happens in our society, and that people don't think about other people and care about their background and where they come from. And that's what I really like about Carrie. And obviously this film spawned 2 remakes and a sequel. I've never seen Carrie 2, The Rage Carrie 2. First Carrie sequel was done in 2002, and I know it's really hated. I know a lot of people really don't like it. It's also very bloated. It's like 2 hours long, I'm pretty sure. I've never watched it because people say it's so terrible. And then obviously there was another remake in 2013 with Chloe Moretz that at the time I watched it, I actually really enjoyed it. I don't think that it's a perfect film by any means, but I think it captures enough of the essence of what makes Brian De Palma's film so good to make it an enjoyable watch. There's some cringy moments, there's some bloated times throughout it that I don't think it needs, but I think if you're gonna watch one of the remakes, the one with Chloe Moretz in it is worth watching, but I don't think anything touches the De Palma film, and I think it's such a well-made horror movie, and I would highly recommend reading King's book and watching De Palma's movie back to back and making a decision for yourself. And Sissy Spacek's performance, one of the best I've ever seen in a horror film. She's absolutely incredible. Her facial expressions throughout the film will be drilled into my mind. Such a bodily performer in the best way possible, and I really liked this movie a lot. So do you agree or disagree with my thoughts on both the book and the movies? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear if you've read the book and watched the movie, what your perspective is on it. I always love hearing different people's perspectives. As always, if you can like the video and subscribe to the channel, it helps me out a lot and lets me know the type of content you're looking for. I'm always putting out new material and look forward to getting more out for you in the near future. And as always, everyone, thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day.